Remember me? I'm the guy whose oak tree Karen illegally cut down last year, the same tree that fell on her house, destroyed her car, and sent her to jail. That massive oak delivered the most perfect karma when it crushed her home and her life, leaving her with mountains of debt. After watching her get hauled away by police, I thought that nightmare was over for good. I was wrong. The email arrived on a quiet Sunday morning. We need to talk about Karen. The sender, Greg, our HOA president. My stomach dropped as I read the next line. She's back in town and looking for revenge. I nearly spit out my coffee. Karen had lost everything, her house, her reputation, over $200,000 in legal fees and damages. Now she was back. I called Greg. Immediately. What do you mean she's back? She's banned from the neighborhood. She bought the vacant lot on Pine Street, Greg said, his voice tight. It's just outside our HOA boundaries. She's building a house there. I glanced out my window toward Pine Street. From that location, Karen would have a perfect view of my house, my yard, and the empty space where my beautiful oak tree once stood. That's not all, Greg continued. She's filed a petition to expand the city's property line adjustment rules. What does that mean? If approved, her property could be annexed into our HOA, and she's already gathering signatures to run for the board. I hung up with Greg and immediately grabbed my laptop. A quick property record search confirmed it. Karen Jenkins had purchased the vacant lot at 478 Pine Street 3 weeks ago. How did I miss this? Neighbors started calling within the hour. Everyone remembered Karen's reign of terror, the petty fines, the harassment. Now she was positioning herself at our doorstep. "We can't let her back in," said Diane from across the street. "She'll make our lives hell again." I agreed. But what could we do? The property was legally hers. 2 days later, I was leaving for work when I spotted a construction crew at Karen's lot. They weren't building yet. They were surveying the land, marking boundaries with bright orange flags. One flag was suspiciously close to the edge of my property. I walked over to the surveyor. "Excuse me, that's not right. That's my land." The man checked his tablet. "According to these plans, this corner belongs to lot 478. I pulled out my phone, showing him my property. Survey from when I bought the house. "See? You're 3 feet onto my property." He frowned, comparing the documents. "Huh. Our client provided different measurements." That's when I heard a familiar voice. "Is there a problem here?" Karen stood behind us, arms crossed, wearing designer sunglasses despite the cloudy day. She looked different. Expensive clothes, new haircut. But her tight-lipped smile was exactly the same. "Your survey is wrong," I said flatly. "You're trying to claim part of my land." She removed her sunglasses slowly. "Am I? Or did you perhaps encroach on this lot years ago? Property lines get confused sometimes." Her smile widened. "Don't worry. I'm sure we can sort this out in court if necessary." She knew exactly what she was doing. A boundary dispute would cost me thousands in legal fees, countless hours, and massive stress, even if I won. This was just the beginning. Within a week, Karen had filed a formal complaint with the city, claiming my fence encroached on her property by 2.8 feet. The city inspector had to come out, measurements were taken, and though they confirmed my fence was correctly placed, I still had to take a day off work to deal with it. Then came the petition. Karen went door to door in neighboring areas, collecting signatures to support her HOA boundary adjustment proposal. Her pitch was clever. She talked about unifying the neighborhood and ensuring consistent property values. Many people who signed didn't know her history. To them, she was just a friendly woman with reasonable ideas. I tried countering with my own information campaign, but Karen was always one step ahead. When I warned one neighbor about her, I received a cease and desist letter the next day claiming I was defaming her character. Karen's construction began in earnest. A massive house, far larger than others nearby, with a towering second-story window perfectly positioned to look directly into my backyard. "It's all perfectly within code," she told the HOA board when concerns were raised about the size. "Unless the board wants another lawsuit for discriminatory treatment." The threat worked. No one wanted legal trouble. Then the accident started. First, my mailbox was destroyed by an unknown vehicle in the night. The following week, my garden hose was cut. Security cameras caught nothing. The angles were just wrong each time. I confronted Karen after the third incident, my car's tires mysteriously punctured. "You can't prove anything," she said calmly, watering the fresh sod in her front yard. "But I hear home security systems are quite affordable these days. You should invest in one." That night, I received an email from the City Council. Karen's boundary adjustment proposal would be heard next month. She'd gathered enough signatures to force a review. Even worse, 3 members of our current HOA board were stepping down, family moves, job transfers, creating unexpected vacancies. Karen had already submitted her candidacy for the board. Greg called an emergency meeting. "If she gets on the board and her property gets annexed, we're all in trouble," he warned the gathered homeowners. "She's got a vendetta and she's playing the long game." "Can't we just block her from joining?" someone asked. "Not without changing the bylaws, which requires a 75% vote," Greg explained. "And half the neighborhood is new. They never experienced Karen's reign." That's when we realized her strategy. She wasn't breaking any rules. She was using them against us. Technically legal, devastatingly effective. I left the meeting with a sinking feeling. Karen had money now, from somewhere, and seemed more calculated than before. This wasn't the impulsive woman who'd cut down my tree. This was someone with a plan. The next morning, I found a business card in my mailbox, a real estate agent, with a handwritten note. "When you're ready to sell and call me first." The day of the city council meeting arrived faster than I expected. I'd prepared my statement, gathered testimonials from original neighbors, even hired my own lawyer to challenge Karen's petition on technical grounds. I felt ready until I walked into the council chambers. Karen wasn't alone. Beside her sat a tall man in an expensive suit. I recognized him immediately, Charles Westfield, the most powerful real estate developer in the county. The man who'd been buying up properties throughout our area for a massive new mixed-use development. My lawyer grabbed my arm. "That's not good," he whispered. "Westfield never shows up unless it's already a done deal." The meeting proceeded like a nightmare in slow motion. Karen presented her case smoothly, professionally, nothing like the shrieking woman who'd been hauled away in handcuffs a year ago. She talked about community cohesion and unified neighborhood standards. Then Westfield stepped up. "My company is prepared to invest $15 million in improvements to this area," he announced, "contingent on unified zoning and HOA coverage." The council members' eyes lit up. $15 million in development funds was clearly more compelling than my stories about Karen's past behavior. When my turn came, I spoke passionately about Karen's history, her vindictive nature, the illegal tree cutting. But the council seemed distracted, already mentally spending Westfield's millions. "While these personal disputes are unfortunate," said Councilwoman Rivera, "we must focus on the broader economic interests of our community." The vote was 4-1 in Karen's favor. Outside the chamber, Karen brushed past me. "The HOA board election is next week," she whispered. "I needed this win first, the rest will follow." I confronted her in the parking lot. "What's your deal with Westfield? Why would he back you?" Karen smiled. "Let's just say he needs someone on the inside of the HOA, someone who can help guide certain zoning exceptions, someone who owes him a favor." Her words hit me like a truck. This wasn't just about revenge against me. Karen had made a deal with Westfield to help him take over the entire neighborhood. "You'd sell out everyone who lives here?" I asked incredulously. They stood by and laughed while I lost everything, she hissed, her composed facade cracking momentarily. "Besides, progress is inevitable. I'm just making sure I come out on top this time." As she drove away in her new luxury car, the horrible truth sank in. Karen wasn't just back, Karen was winning. I couldn't sleep that night. Karen's words kept echoing in my head. Westfield needed someone on the inside of the HOA. What exactly were they planning? At 3 a.m. I started researching. Charles Westfield's development company had a pattern. Enter modest neighborhoods, build massive complexes that drove up taxes and forced out original residents, then flip the properties for massive profit. But he needed zoning changes to make it work. That's where Karen fit in. As an HOA board member, she could help push through the preliminary approvals Westfield needed. By morning, I'd formed a plan. I called Greg, then my lawyer, then every original homeowner I trusted. We met at my house that afternoon. "We have 5 days until the HOA election," I explained. "We need to either block Karen from winning or find something that will stop Westfield's plan completely." We divided tasks. Some would campaign for alternative board candidates, others would dig into the development plans. My job? Find out exactly what Karen and Westfield were planning. The next day, I noticed Karen meeting with construction managers at her half-built house. I waited until they left, then approached her with a peace offering, a potted plant, and my most convincing fake smile. "Congratulations on the council victory," I said. "Maybe it's time we buried the hatchet." Karen's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Really? After everything?" I shrugged. "The neighborhood's changing. Maybe it's time I considered Westfield's offer to buy my place and move on." That caught her interest. "He's approached you already?" "Indirectly," I lied. "But I'm curious what the full plan is before I decide." Karen studied me, then seemed to make a calculation. "There's a presentation for potential investors tomorrow night at Westfield's office. Come as my guest. See for yourself." I'd expected more resistance, but Karen wanted to gloat. Showing me her triumph was too tempting to resist. The investor meeting was eye-opening. Westfield's plans were worse than I'd imagined. Maplewood Estates wasn't just getting a new development, the entire neighborhood would be razed and rebuilt as Westfield Commons. Karen sat beside me, watching my face as the presentation revealed how our homes would be demolished. "Surprised?" she whispered. "You're destroying everything, even your own new house." I whispered back. "My house is just for show. Once the project breaks ground, Westfield pays me triple market value, plus a consultant fee for each phase of development." She smirked. Not bad for someone who was bankrupt a year ago. I left with a USB drive of the presentation that Karen proudly provided. "So you can make an informed decision," she said, clearly believing I'd sell out too. The next morning, all hell broke loose. The HOA emergency meeting I'd called was packed. When I projected Westfield's plans on the wall, gasps filled the room. "This can't be legal," someone shouted. "It is if the HOA approves the initial zoning requests," my lawyer explained. "That's why Karen wants on the board so badly." The homeowners were furious, but Karen had spent months building support among newer residents. We needed something more to stop her. That's when Diane burst in, waving papers. "Found something!" She'd discovered that Westfield's company had been sued 3 times for environmental violations. More importantly, their current proposal would route drainage directly into protected wetlands behind our neighborhood. This could stop the entire project, my lawyer confirmed after reviewing the documents. We had leverage, but we needed proof of Karen's involvement to block her election. That required something she'd never give willingly, evidence of her deal with Westfield. The next day was my only chance. Karen was hosting a campaign event at her partially constructed house. While everyone gathered in the front yard, I slipped around back. Her home office had a temporary desk set up with a computer. Locked. Of course. I was about to give up when I noticed the contractor's clipboard hanging nearby. Under the construction permits was what I needed: Karen's contract with Westfield. Complete with commission structures for each home, she helped get condemned through HOA maneuvering. I snapped photos with my phone just as Karen's voice came from the doorway. "Finding anything interesting?" she asked, arms crossed. "Enough," I replied, holding up my phone. "Deal with Westfield plans to condemn houses through fake HOA violations, your commission structure. It's all here." Karen lunged for my phone, but I stepped aside. She stumbled, crashing into the temporary desk. Her computer fell, cracking against the concrete floor. "You've destroyed everything once," she snarled. "You won't do it again." She grabbed a hammer from a nearby toolbox and swung wildly. I backed away as she advanced, her eyes filled with the same rage from a year ago when she'd confronted me about the tree. "All I wanted was control of my neighborhood," she shouted. "Then you took everything from me." "You did that yourself, Karen," I said, still backing up, "just like you're doing now." She swung again. I dodged, but tripped on an extension cord, falling backward through the opening where French doors would eventually be installed. Karen stood over me, hammer raised. That's when flashing lights illuminated her face. Police cars. Diane stood at the edge of the yard with 2 officers. "That's her," she was saying. "We have reason to believe she's conspiring to commit real estate fraud." Karen's face contorted with rage. She looked from the officers to me, then to the hammer in her hand. For a terrifying moment, I thought she might actually swing. Instead, she dropped the hammer and adopted a shocked expression. "Officer, thank goodness you're here. This person broke into my home and attacked me." The officer looked skeptical. "Ma'am, we have multiple witnesses who say otherwise." As they approached, I held up my phone. "I also have evidence of her conspiracy with Westfield Development to defraud homeowners." The officer took my phone, scrolling through the photos. "Ma'am, I think you'd better come with us." As they led Karen away again, she turned to me with pure hatred. "This isn't over. Westfield has the council in his pocket. The development will still happen." But she was wrong. By morning, local news had broken the story. Environmental groups were filing injunctions. The city council was backpedaling, calling for further review of all Westfield projects. And the HOA election? Karen's opponent won by a landslide. 3 months later, Maplewood Estates was unrecognizable in the best possible way. Instead of Westfield's concrete jungle, our neighborhood had rallied around a different vision. Karen's half-built McMansion had been seized and converted into our new community center. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. As for Karen herself, the fraud charges stuck this time. No probation, no community service, actual jail time. The judge was particularly unmoved by her "this is persecution" defense, especially when presented with her history. Westfield's development company was under federal investigation. 3 council members had resigned amid bribery allegations. Our neighborhood had not only survived, it had become stronger. "You know what's funny?" Greg said as we sat on my porch, watching kids ride bikes across the street. "If Karen had just lived her life instead of obsessing over revenge, she'd be free right now." I nodded. Some people never learn. The doorbell rang. It was a delivery, official mail. I opened it right there. "What is it?" Greg asked. I laughed, holding up the document. "Karen's being sued by Westfield for breach of contract. He's claiming she guaranteed HOA approval." Greg snorted. "Perfect. The best part of all? That empty spot where my oak tree had stood, it wasn't empty anymore. We'd planted a new tree there last week, a community event, everyone taking turns with the shovel. It would take years to reach the majesty of the original oak, but that was okay. Some things are worth waiting for, and this time, no Karen would ever touch it.